Hey guys, Nick Espinoza for the COVID-19 Cyber Threat Coalition here. And today I've got a very special guest. I'm very excited to talk to this guy, and you can all check out his hat, to see where he's probably from. But this is Randall Frietzsche, also known as Fritz, and he is the Chief Information Security Officer, or CISO, of Denver Health. And Fritz, thank you very much for joining me here.
Thanks for having me, Nick.
All right, great. Well, let's dive right in, because first things first, obviously we're in the middle of a pandemic, and our front line are our doctors and our nurses in hospitals, that are keeping us healthy and hopefully safe. How's Denver Health staff in general just holding up with the mess that is this pandemic?
Well, I don't think it's any different than any other hospital in the world, really. They are trying to conserve PPE just in case there's a very large surge hitting the hospital. It doesn't appear that we're going to have to utilize, more than we have. Certain types of PPE have been challenging to get, and others have been fine. We're doing really well considering. Colorado has a little over 800, maybe 800 or 900 total cases.
Okay.
And we've probably seen 100 or 200 of those in our hospital.
Wow. Well, and from what I understand, you guys, Denver Health is the largest health system in Colorado, or the largest health system around Denver?
No, we're not the largest, but we're the best.
Fair enough.
We are the critical care, the safety net hospital for Denver. We are the level 1 trauma center. We're one of the level 1 trauma centers. So, if you get shot or have a heart attack, you probably drive past 5 hospitals to come to Denver Health. World-class trauma team, doctors and surgeons. And then we also, the city is standing up our convention center as a field hospital. And we're sort of in charge of that. So we're staffing that. We're bringing in the equipment and the technology. And I think for the larger part, we'll be staffing that if it ever is needed.
Yeah. And I mean, I think we're seeing a lot of that. Central Park in New York City was cannibalized for basically a MASH unit. I mean, that's, it's just been an interesting time, living through this. And, as you mentioned, you're bringing in technology, to obviously make this operational as a makeshift hospital. And, obviously by virtue of this, not just you, but everybody in the cybersecurity community, myself in general, has seen a rise, in COVID related cyber threats, against hospitals. So what is Denver Health seeing, and what are you doing to combat them, especially as you're, spinning up makeshift medical facilities?
Well, of course, there always were a lot of threats out there. Now I believe it's 600 to 1,000% increase in phishing attacks. So we have ramped up awareness. I send out a monthly all hands email to the entire organization, outlining the threats and what to look for. Of course, we train them on phishing in their annual training and their new hire training. And it actually makes them walk through emails and spot the suspicious items. So I feel like we train them really well. We do phishing campaigns as well, and test the organization in terms of their resiliency around phishing threats. But now just stepping up the increased awareness, monthly emails, plus we have a daily huddle sheet that goes out around COVID related items. And at the top of every email is a warning, phishing alert. There's a high risk now, even more than before. And I used 3 things. I always say people can remember if you give them 3 things to remember. And that is pause, take a moment, pause. Don't just, click it automatically out of just routine. Pause, take a look at it. If it's coming from an external source, make sure that you're reviewing all the indicators of a phishing email. And then, so pause, review, and then act. So now if it's not suspicious, if you don't believe it's suspicious, then take appropriate action. If you do feel it's suspicious, then, call the help desk, send it to the help desk security team and so forth, so we can both check and see if it's legitimate or not. And if it's not, to make sure no one else got it. And if they did get it, that they didn't click on it. So.
Right, right. And that's, things do get through spam filters. I'm sure you guys have a
They
real
do.
solid one as well. And so I think that is beyond important. And also, if we're looking at this, what we are seeing, and hospitals are no different, even though I think your workforce would probably be a hybrid, you're probably sending a lot of those non-essential, non-frontline in the ER dealing with the coronavirus. You're sending those people home. And by virtue of that, you then have to retool the network in your architecture to have these remote people possibly connecting from, let's say, home networks that you can control.
Right.
Right. Who knows if Junior's been on the computer at the home just downloading God knows what. And
Right.
now you're sending them home with a Denver Health issued, laptop
Exactly.
and having them connect. How are you guys balancing security versus accessibility as you shift these workers, to remote?
Well, the one thing I can say is we had about 40 full-time remote workers in February, and like almost overnight, we went up to 2,200 workers, full-time remote workers. Luckily, we were very well prepared for that. We had already set up remote access correctly. So we have VPN, and we have the remote portal where it's basically application publication.
Mhm.
And we have multi-factor authentication set up for both of those, and we don't allow RDP to the internet.
Good.
And you can't be on the VPN unless you're on a Denver Health device and so forth. So we did have all that. The scramble, getting people laptops, um, approving people for remote access work, which you actually have to have a manager approval. All of that sort of administrative work was really tough to get done in that shorter period of time, and the teams were all hands on deck even through the weekend, trying to make sure we got everybody as up and functional very quickly. But the problem really was more of I'm not used to working from home. My kids are at home from school. They're
Right.
screaming in the background because
Right.
they have ants in their pants,
Right.
and so the challenge of beyond technology for a lot of us is has been real. But we have since found that we can send home a lot of providers to do their work 100% full time.
Mm.
For instance, radiologists who read x-rays and those types of things, they're 100% functional remote, and they're asking, why should I ever come back into the hospital?
Yeah. Yeah.
Which is
And
interesting.
yeah. Well, and I think that's the new reality. And part of it also becomes, I think, the issue, especially if you're looking at like a radiologist, the issue I think would become bandwidth, in the sense that you need to look
Yes,
at high resolution, blown up pictures. It would probably
absolutely.
really suck to look at it through some kind of
Right,
terminal environment.
right.
So now by virtue of it, your bandwidth calculation has to be, just massive when you've got, let's say an entire army of radiologists that say, I can just sit at home and review this. you know,
Right,
not to mention anything else, depending on how you set up your VPN, you might
right.
catch people trying to stream Netflix, which is just obviously
Absolutely.
then routing through your infrastructure.
Mm,
So that's got to be a big challenge, just I think in real time, like identifying, one, those workers, but two, also identifying potential, uses of your bandwidth that shouldn't be.
right. And the other challenge was telehealth.
Mhm.
Almost exactly the same number of telehealth visits, and the whole month of February we had 40
Mhm.
visits,
Mhm.
and in one day in March we had 1,000 telehealth visits on one
Wow.
day. And
Right.
so the increase in the need of technology,
Mhm.
um, and the other thing is we want people to stay home if they feel like they're sick, to be able to do a telehealth visit keeps them out of the hospital and
Yeah.
increasing their exposure or exposure of others to them, and exposure of our providers to them. So we have done a lot of phone telehealth, uh, some online telehealth, and also for our doctors who are rounding on patients in the hospital, COVID patients, we have enabled them to use laptops or a video conference technology. So we'll leave a device in the room for the patient, and the doctor can round from his office.
Mhm.
And in cases where they don't have to actually put hands on the patient, That enables the doctors to decrease their exposure to
Mhm.
potential exposure to COVID virus, and also to save PPE, because every
Yeah,
time they go in and out, they have to change out, and
right.
so that saves PPE as well. So
Yeah.
telehealth is the new real, right? The new reality. So
Yeah, and it seems, and to that point, I mean, it seems like one of those things that's going to be by virtue of the coronavirus, this pandemic, is I think the whole world has been moving to remote work. Let's say for the last decade or so, as the technology becomes more widely available and the internet
right.
bandwidth becomes better, and all in all, I kind of feel like the coronavirus pandemic here. If we were in a car moving towards remote work, the coronavirus came in and basically cut the brake lines and dropped a cinder block on the accelerator. you know and a lot of people are not going to want to go back to that.
Right.
And by virtue of that, I would have to imagine one of the largest challenges, at least in this initial transition, because everybody is scrambling, and I'm assuming Denver Health would be no different.
Mhm.
And you alluded to this on the anti-phishing side with education, but the education of your users, because suddenly, they're used to walking into the building with their cup of coffee, sitting down, logging in, just getting to work. Now you've got to train them on VPN. Now you've got to train them on whatever defensive technologies and connection technologies. That's got to be a real tough thing when you've got 2,200 people immediately leaving. Your IT staff, it must have been quite the effort.
So they already were. IT was already at full capacity, where we had to prioritize projects, and a lot of stuff was getting pushed because they just didn't have the capacity to do it. And then all of a sudden, the COVID bomb dropped on us, and everything became a critical priority.
Yeah.
And so in the beginning, we had probably 200 critical COVID projects dropped in their lap, and we were on calls every
Wow.
single day,
Wow.
working through the details, working on prioritization, and so basically all IT projects ceased, and it was COVID for the foreseeable future. And for security, not only does that mean we have to support the organizational projects that come up that involve some sort of technology connectivity. We have to be involved and support that, but we also have to still stay standing on the wall watching against the threats,
Yeah.
and the threats have exponentially increased.
Right.
So we are highly functional team. We got some military folks with great backgrounds, and our organization has supported us for a long time around our cybersecurity program, which is great. Puts us in a great position. Like I said, we're prepared from a security standpoint. I can't imagine if RDP was your only remote access option,
Yeah.
right? Because
Yeah.
you'd be in a world of hurt. And you couldn't really spin up that technology, implement it, and train everybody on it overnight like we had to do. So
Yeah.
thankfully, we have been well supported by the organization. They care about cybersecurity. Um, they have me very involved. I have to update to the board at least 2-3 times a year, and I'm represented on the executive compliance committee as well. And so we really care about cybersecurity, and we care about the confidentiality of our patients, and really for in a healthcare situation, the physical security of the patients, right?
Yeah.
You know, I say there's only a couple of different ways that you can kill a patient with a cyber attack. One is through biomedical devices, and one is industrial control, probably get
Right.
oil and gas.
Right.
But so at this point, we're really mostly focused on the patient safety, and really enabling the organization to treat patients at a high rate, even if we're crushed by a surge in coronavirus, to be able to be resilient to that and still provide the level of care that we provide. And so that requires all hands on deck, and it requires us all to be extremely highly attentive. We're scanning all the threat intel sources. We have, we use the ISACs. We use several threat intel sources. I think Jeff Linenfelser has introduced me to the COVID Slack channel,
Mhm.
where we get just a waterfall of data just constantly on that thing,
Mhm.
and we utilize it, and update our tools and controls and try to stay on top of this thing.
And that's great. Just coming from the COVID-19 Cyber Threat Coalition, we are beyond thrilled to have Denver Health and any hospital and health organization, absorb and ingest our just nonstop threat intelligence that's coming out from our volunteers. I think that's great.
Yes.
And I think you mentioned something earlier, just now that I think a lot of people just miss the boat on, in the sense that if we are looking at, holistically cybersecurity, if we are running confidentiality, integrity, and availability, we are actually executing those through physical, technical, and administrative safeguards,
Yes.
especially in a HIPAA compliant environment, like what you're running. And so a lot of people think, oh, I'm installing a firewall and an antivirus, and here we go. No, there's a lot more to this as well. And so God forbid the generators get knocked out because somebody can hack them, or the ventilators go offline. And that actually leads me to another question, regarding IoT, because we have a ton of medical IoT out there. And I mean, I think both you and I know that oftentimes in IoT, as they race these things to market, they cut corners. We
Yes.
find hard-coded passwords. That oftentimes IoT, from a cybersecurity standpoint, it can be a very serious challenge. I mean, look at the Mirai virus in 2016.
Yes.
You guys, I have to imagine, then have a very tight control over that, especially if you are having to rush to install IoT into makeshift hospitals like stadiums and stuff
Yes.
like that. That has got to be a huge challenge for you guys.
It is, and we have a very mature program around that. And the basics are, you have to classify and inventory what you have, and we really care about the network biomed devices. And so we take all the network biomed devices and we classify them into a security matrix. And the matrix has all these security controls. Is it wired or wireless? Is it, what OS is it running? Is it, can you update the software? Can you update the OS? Can you change the passwords, or do you have to use the default passwords? Can you vulnerability scan it? And so, maybe a list of probably 25, 30 controls that we rated against. And then we have that matrix and we fill it out, this type of device, it has this, and this, right? And then that creates a security profile for us. And then we know, if you're, whatever profile you're in, what additional compensating controls that we need to add in that situation for that classification of network biomed device to raise up the level to an acceptable level, right? And so just doing that, it just gives me a level of comfort that, I know there are probably NT4 boxes out there, that can never be updated.
Right.
And, the compensating control for that might be shut it off until you need it. Then when you need it, turn it on, get something out of it, and shut it back off again. And that's a perfectly acceptable way to mitigate the risk. And we have to recognize sometimes there are those that, they're 30-year-old devices. They're critical and they don't make them anymore. And we still use it for some reason. And so there's just, various ways of being creative around additional compensating controls to, based on the classification of that device and how it's configured and how it's configurable and how it's not configurable.
Yeah. And, and I think that's a really good point. And I've been very happy to see in the last couple of years that there have been just cybersecurity frameworks dedicated to IoT, dedicated to understanding the positives and negatives and building that framework. So for example, the IoT Security Institute, has a framework that I think is based heavily off of NIST and, and some other organizations and frameworks that really focuses on that. And it's good to see, controls and compensating controls coming into play, especially in a hospital system, because it's just beyond critical. And I still see NT4 out there, although it's usually in manufacturing. And it's usually the manufacturing companies that say, I'll be damned if I'm spending another $1 million just to buy a new CNC machine when my NT4, I'm using it till the wheels
great.
fall off. And so it's everybody's different with that. And I'm also glad that you are, Denver Health is, being active in the COVID-19 Cyber Threat Coalition and ingesting our intel. And I'm going to end it here. But I want to know if organizations like the Cyber Threat Coalition, how we can better assist hospitals, and what you're doing with our intel. What I have to imagine would be helping to, defend your endpoints and your perimeters as well. But, what's your experience been so far?
It's been good. It's hard to keep up with it, frankly. Um, if it were more of a feed, I think, and there may be, the feed might be more helpful. And just, just a data dump, you know.
Mhm.
I do see things from time to time. I try to review it a couple times a day at least, and the team's certainly looking at that and other threat intel sources. But I do, things catch my eye, and then I grab them and I send them off to the team.
Mhm.
And so that manual process for me is a little more difficult to work with than just to getting a feed. But I have other CISO, healthcare CISOs that I'm connection with, and we have a little LinkedIn chat going. And if I see something, I share it out to that group, and vice versa, and then we'll all go update our controls. And I found that's also an effective way of doing that. I can't have every CISO in the country for healthcare in that, but certainly in this area, in the Denver metro area, I have a lot of CISOs in healthcare that are participating in that. That's really helpful.
Yeah, that's great. And I think one of the things that I've absolutely loved to see, by virtue of this pandemic, is just everybody coming together to help everybody else. It's not Denver Health versus the other hospital. It's like, you know what, we're all in
Right.
this together. Nobody wants to go down.
Right.
We all care about humanity. Well, minus the jerks that are breaking into us, but
Right.
but other than them, it's been really great to see. And a lot of people don't realize, like the Cyber Threat Coalition, for example. Our incoming intel feeds of IOCs are it's around 100 million IOCs a day that we are
Wow.
actually collecting, and our dedicated team is sifting through to put out this ever-growing block list, on our website that anybody can download. And I think that's,
Mm,
it's just been an amazing labor of love, I think, for a
mm.
ton of volunteers. It's been awesome to see. But Fritz, thank you so much, for
Thank
your
you.
time here today. It's just been absolutely fascinating, and I'm so glad that Denver Health is on top of it, and you guys are staying safe, not just your hospital staff, but obviously your IT and cybersecurity. You guys are safe, you're on it, and you're defending your perimeter as well. If anybody wants to know more about you, or find you on social media, or just Denver Health in general, is there anything that you want to plug, or talk about, Twitter handles or anything like that?
So denverhealth.org is our hospital website. I am on LinkedIn heavily, and all of my profile is on there as well. And I do write a lot of posts, uh, and I've written a few articles on there as well too. Some of it's not related to cybersecurity. I have a law enforcement background, and I've written some around that as well, and like color codes of awareness and things like that, which I think we can easily adapt from sort of the physical security world to the
Right.
cybersecurity world.
Mhm.
So yeah, look me up on LinkedIn.
That's great. That's
But
great.
you
Well,
got to say that you heard me on this podcast, or I may not accept.
fair enough. Fair enough. Yes. And once again, Fritz, thank you very much. And to everybody out there, please, please stay healthy, stay safe, and stay online. Thanks, everyone.